You are listening to the Be a Better Being podcast, hosted by the founder of Better Beings, Michelle Zellner. Michelle's experiences have equipped her with knowledge and perspective, and for nearly 3 decades, she has been informing, influencing, and inspiring thousands on their journeys. This show spotlights guests of diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise, but they all align with Michelle's purpose and passion to help you be a better human being. There is something for everyone on their way to a healthier, happier life. Enjoy the show.
Greetings. Thank you for tuning into the Be a Better Being podcast. This is episode 130, released on February 3rd. We're out of the longest, coldest, darkest month, at least in my opinion, and I could not be happier. I also could not be happier to have my guest on today. Tracy Duhaney is a powerhouse in leadership development and organizational strategy. She has a rich career dedicated to helping leaders and organizations achieve peak performance. As the CEO of Ambaselli Group, Tracy's expertise lies in guiding teams to enhance leadership skills, improve communication, and foster collaboration. But it doesn't end there. It extends well beyond business. She is also the board chair-elect for the American Heart Association Southwest Florida's Chairman's Board of Directors, where she plays a pivotal role in promoting heart health awareness and initiatives, particularly for women. Tracy's involvement with the AHA is personal, driven by her own experience as a survivor of heart disease, which she openly shares as a testament to resilience and advocacy. And given that we are in Heart Month and that Friday is Wear Red Day, I could not think of a better person to have on the show with me today. So Tracy, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you and I met in September 2024 at the Women of Steel Business Conference, which I don't even know how I got to be so lucky to be part of that community, but I just met so many incredible women and connections and learning about you and all the things that you're doing. So my last guest, Adam Reber, talked about leadership in organizations and leadership development. He learned basically through the military. From a man's perspective, amazing. And yet we know that it's very different for a female. And so I want to talk about the heart stuff, and I want to talk about all your incredible work that you're doing to help women, and like you said, or like I said about you, women and organizations really develop the leaders within them. So maybe let's even go back before we dig into that. Let's get your background. Obviously, we know who you are, but where'd you come from? How you doing? What you're doing today?
Oh, I love this question because every time you talk about or you ask someone, tell me about yourself, right? Our default tends to be going to what we do for a profession, and then it segues into if you're a mom, a wife, etc. And then we start painting this picture of the roles that we play as women without getting to the heart of who we are. And no pun intended with the heart of, or maybe there is. But, for me, I am originally from Kingston, Jamaica. I am an immigrant. I am first generation US citizen here, and I went to school in Ohio and then made my way to Naples, Florida. And I've been in Naples ever since. That's, as you mentioned, we met at the Women of Steel event in Naples, and I call Florida my home. No offense, but I can't see myself being anywhere else because with the weather we've been having the last couple of weeks, Florida's where it's at. But then don't hold me to that once it's hurricane season. I am an avid traveler. I love exploring different cultures, different places. I love to cook. I love trying new recipes because there's just something about trying something a little different and seeing if it works out or whether it doesn't. And with that, I love animals. I am a supporter of wildlife conservation on top of everything else that you've mentioned that I do. I believe that we can coexist with Mother Nature and with animals. And the world is big enough for all of that. And when you explore different areas and different cultures and different countries, you get to see just how vast the world is, but just how amazing people are. And I like to bring back different facets of that to my work in leadership development and organizational culture, because even with our own organizations, you have so many subcultures that exist. And it's important that we recognize them and we celebrate them if we're truly going to collaborate within our teams and put forth our best foot to say, hey, these are our goals and this is what we're trying to achieve. So in a nutshell, on top of everything you just said, that's a little bit about me as a person, not just the roles or, the traditional tell me about yourself. And that's what I really love sharing because it's different than what women tend to default to.
Well, I totally agree. And I think it is where we come from and what we've learned and the experiences that we've had that we do then bring to all the things that we do
Yes.
and, who we
Yes.
are and how we label ourselves later. I want to just say Jamaica to Ohio, like, I don't know that
That's
you could get two more extremes.
It's funny because that's usually the response I get. But when I was applying for colleges, there was a college in Ohio, the College of Worcester, that had a very robust recruitment program in Jamaica. And they offered me the highest in financial aid, so it became a no brainer. And Jamaicans were actually the second largest nationality on campus, first being Americans. But they really were going for a cultural diversity amongst the student body, and they achieved it. And I love my alma mater because it was more than just schooling. They taught me how to think. And I think that has been part of my foundation when it comes to looking and thinking outside the box. So, yes, going from an island girl to the snow and then settling in a kind of hybrid with Florida.
Yeah, it's kind of like the best of both worlds. I love it.
It is. It is.
So I want to tackle the heart stuff first. As a heart disease survivor, like tell us that whole journey, the process, exactly what that means, and then obviously your alignment with American Heart, which many people who have been listening to me, I've been very involved with American Heart for many, many years. So when I even learned that piece about you, I was like, oh, we are definitely sisters in life here.
Yes,
So yeah, tell us just a little bit about just heart disease in your family, your own experience with it, and how you're now
absolutely.
using your experience to be an even bigger platform for advocacy.
Absolutely. I love that. As you mentioned, February is Heart Month, right? And we coincide with all the traditional Valentine's Day where you see hearts everywhere, but you default to thinking about love. But at the root of love is from the heart, right? And my story ties to COVID. In April of 2021, I contracted COVID and I ended up in the hospital. And for me, I was intubated and I developed every single thing that could have happened except for death, thankfully, during my stay in the hospital. And one of which was atrial fibrillation, and I developed water on my heart. And that journey from being hospitalized out back into the world and going through developing a relationship with my cardiologist at that age, I never in a million years would have thought that I would have had a cardiologist and a pulmonologist and all the other specialties at mid 30s, early 30s. And just going through that whole process made me realize just how fragile life is, right? And things can change overnight. But then also areas of your health that you don't normally think about or you seem to take for granted because, oh, your numbers are great, it can change in an instant. I did not have any precursors or any preconditions before contracting COVID, and I was not one of those cases where they say you're predisposed or et cetera. I was perfectly healthy, and it was my fate. So since that episode, I have become an advocate for knowing your numbers between your blood pressure numbers, your weight numbers, the essential eight, as the Heart Association will refer to, and how easy it is to overlook heart disease because heart disease means so many different things. People hear heart disease and they think, oh, you need to have a stent, or you need to have a valve replacement, or you have just high blood pressure. There's so many different ways you can categorize heart disease. And what a lot of women don't realize is that heart disease is the number one killer of women in the United States. And when you say that to women, I usually get a look as if, really? Yes, it's higher than breast cancer. Things that we traditionally think are unique to us. No, heart disease is the number one killer of women. And that's a statistic that really hit home for me, understanding where I went with my health and what the journey has been since then. And just like everything else in my life, I want women to be the best versions of themselves and understand themselves from the inside out. That also includes their health, right? Not just mentally or emotionally understanding you, but what about physically? What is it about you outside of your physical confidence and appearance? What's going on inside, right? Because as women, we're busy taking care of everyone else. We're taking care of the kids, the husband, the household, the jobs, everything. And usually what happens is, if you start to feel any of the symptoms, we brush it off saying, oh, I just need to drink water, or I did a lot today, I didn't get enough sleep. There's always an excuse for why we're feeling how we're feeling. And then it's usually when it gets to be too late that we realize this is part of a bigger problem. So that's why it comes back to knowing your numbers, but also being in tune with your body and recognizing that heart health is overall health because everything stems from the heart, right? And really being truthful and honest with your doctor and yourself as to what's going on, because I don't know about you, but I'm not risking that again. As much as I can avoid it, I will. And it's important to me that all women recognize that.
And that is such an important message coming from somebody as young as you. So you are in that group that I call the YBI, Young, Beautiful, and Invincible. Think
Oh, I love that.
nothing could ever happen to you. So here's what's interesting, Tracy. Heart disease is the number one killer of women. And that statistic has been true for decades, decades. I personally have been saying that message for decades. And yet they still don't know it. How is that
Yeah.
possible? This is what I have a hard time understanding. We've known this for decades. You add up all of the cancers together, doesn't even come close to heart disease. And we've been saying it for decades. Literally, Go Red for Women just celebrated 20 years last year. It was the 20th anniversary of Go Red for Women, specifically devoted to women's heart health. For at least 20 years, we have known that heart disease is the number one killer of women. And yet, so many don't know it.
Absolutely. And what's also interesting too, when you talk about longevity of these organizations, the Heart Association celebrated 100 years last year. And there were so many other organizations within the last 5 years that have celebrated their centennial. And to even further that point as to the progress we've made, but even within that progress, that took research, that took funding, that took initiative, right? So for all of that to have transpired, and especially as you mentioned, the Go Red for Women, for it to not be essential in part of our understanding of our health, it's concerning. But even further so, when you talk to people and they don't realize, the signs of a stroke, right? You have the fast model when you talk about face drooping, arm limp, and you talk about slurred speech and it's time to call 911. Or you talk about people who in an organization or even in their households, does anyone know CPR, right? And then something as simple as that. And there's so many statistics that exist that if you know and apply CPR in an emergency situation, it has a higher chance of saving that person. And when we have those realities, but we still don't have one per household or one per department or X amount per organization knowing CPR, knowing where their AEDs are, that is it's a narrowing perspective that I don't understand. And I think this came to light recently when I was at an organization. Oh, I was doing a walkthrough with an organization. And one of my questions was, where are your AEDs? And the person doing the walkthrough with me, she said, I think we have 3 around the facility. And I said, do you know where they are? She's like, oh, well, the map will tell you. So you don't know where they are? And in my head, I said, hold on, that's an opportunity, right? Because if you as a manager doing this walkthrough, you don't know where your AEDs are, that needs to be part of your safety training, right? And then I also asked it's my default now, which is my AHA hat, but how many of your team members are trained in CPR? Well, we're all trained. I said, okay, and and they're all prepared to act, or is it a training that it's just a checklist? Because we have to be honest with that as to these are life-saving techniques. This is not a game just to say they are trained, that we've we've made the checklist, we've, accomplished the goals. No, this is okay. We understand, we're ready to act. We know where our support is. We know where our check-ins are, all of the above. I'm sorry, all of the above, and just the importance behind it for every team member.
Those are such great questions to ask in an organization. I'm kind of impressed that she knew what an AED was, because a lot of
if she did, that would have been a different conversation.
Right? I would venture to say there's a handful of people listening who are like, what's an AED? So
Yeah.
if even this conversation makes one person know what it is, learn CPR, make sure they know where their AEDs are in their organizations. I live in a high rise. We have this conversation every year, right? The AED is down, but in the gym. Well, guess what? 90% of the people in this building don't use the gym. And you think, oh, because a heart attack is going to happen in the gym. No, it's probably going to happen in your bathroom. That's where it's going to happen, okay, at 2 a.m. So
Yeah,
yeah. So it's not hard
absolutely.
even to have one in your house. Like these are not expensive devices, and to learn hands only CPR, very easy. And so absolutely encourage any and everybody to make sure you have these skills and that you are ready to use them.
Absolutely. And that's really the mission of the AHA as we look into 2025. And locally for our Southwest Florida Chairman's Board, we talk about what our goals are going to be for the new fiscal year and really ramping up the brand awareness and engagement for Heart Association because we want it to be that default. When you hear breast cancer, you think pink, you think October, you think especially locally we were having real men wear pink, and we were having Susan G. Komen, and we were having all these things that people instantaneously knew were affiliated with breast cancer. But then you ask people, okay, tell me about Heart Association. Do you know what Heart Awareness Month is? Do you know where this is? Nope. They've heard of the Heart Association, but all of those affiliates to help broaden and spread the message, they're not connecting, right? So that has been part of global initiative as to expanding that awareness to say, this is what it means for Heart Month. This is what we're focused on. One of the initiatives that we had for this fiscal year for Southwest Florida was making our counties heart safe, which meant for our larger employers like the school system, the sheriff's offices, the some of our larger organizations that are here with the amount of employees that they have, if those at least can start to have CPR certified participants, then we're already on our way to being heart safe. Right. And that was something that we really wanted to focus on. And it's moving mountains right now because a lot of people, especially in those communities that also we found are more affected because of their genetic makeup, they're now becoming more aware, right? Or if the communities that we also have pharmacy deserts, we're also bringing awareness to that and the overall health and wellness that exists throughout this, and really showing that we have to take a proactive stance when it comes to heart health and overall health.
And my listeners know, but let's just reinforce what that proactive stance is, right? It's proper nutrition. It is physical activity. It is manage your stress. It's get your sleep. It's know your numbers, heart, your blood pressure, your glucose, your waist circumference, your cholesterol
Like,
panels. Some of those may be more important than others, but you've got to know your numbers and be a
and
critical
drink more.
thinker. Don't just know the number, but know what it means and know
Yes.
what lifestyle impacts affect your number, because almost all these numbers are lifestyle related. And
Yes.
that's the thing about heart disease, right? Yes, your genetics is going to load the gun, your habits are going to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
So you have to take personal responsibility, and you have to take control of the decisions and the choices to decide that you want to be heart healthy. Hopefully then we'll never need CPR or that AED, right? But of
You know,
course, those things are going to happen. So, what are some things maybe, pre and post heart survivor? Have you personally made any changes, or even within your family, your friends, your community circles, how you encourage them to live a heart healthy lifestyle?
well, I will say first and foremost, for me this year in 2025, part of my not resolution, but part of my focus goals were going to included more movement because I already go to the gym, but I think people here going to the gym, and whether it be an hour a day or at least 3 to 4 times a week, and think, okay, well, I did the gym, but I can spend the rest of the time on the couch, or I'm working remotely so I can sit in the chair all day because I'm going to the gym for an hour. No, it's consistent movement, right? And for me, one of those actions tied into doing my 11,000 steps per day, right? Which is actually, despite having the dog, it's quite harder than you would think when the weather doesn't cooperate. But on top of that, it's the healthy nutrition and really looking at, okay, what am I taking into my system? And while I love food, I love to cook, like I mentioned, maybe don't do those really rich foods as frequently because I'm not going to cut it out, but it's all about proportion. Then it's opening the door for conversation because I've been very vocal with my story for the purpose of there's no visual indication that I went through this. Right. And I think that's where people come from, where just like mental health, which is another passion for mine. If there's no physical visual representation to say that you went through something or you are going through it, people tend to dismiss it. When you have cancer, if someone unfortunately lost their hair, there's something that shows that they're in the middle of something, and there's more empathy that comes from that. But because there's nothing obvious, it gets dismissed. And that's why for me, I'm a bubbly personality. I love to be out on social and talk to people and engage, but I have my moments where I get extremely winded. And that ties into my heart, and my lungs are still healing. And that leads to the conversation that comes after that as to here's what I went through, and here's what I'm continuously working through, and here's how you can support. And usually people come back and say, I had no idea. Yes. Yes, there are a lot of people living with some form of heart disease, whether they know it or not. And that's why I've chosen to be this vocal, because I want other people to recognize the signs within themselves if they have it, and start the conversations internally with their own circles.
That's such a great place to start. So let's talk about what some of those signs are, because I'm willing to bet a lot of people don't even know the signs.
Well, you have your traditional, like I mentioned, first and foremost, people also neglect to see that stroke is related to the heart association,
Right.
And that often gets overlooked, but that is something that, as we're progressing again with that brand awareness and engagement, 9 times out of 10 for any heart association event or collateral, you'll see FAST, F-A-S-T, right? And those were the indicators that I mentioned before for stroke. With your face is drooping or someone's face is drooping, the arm is limp, you're slurred or their slurred speech, it's time to call 911, right? And I think that's where it comes from awareness and being hyper aware of their environment around you and people. If something seems off or it seems different, and just say, are you okay? Right? And I can't tell you any personal affiliations with stroke, thankfully, but I've had people who just memorizing fast, they saw it and they acted, right? And that's again the difference between life and death. Acting, knowing what to look for. Then for heart attacks, I should say, cardiac arrest. If you see people who are limp, they're holding their chest, they're hunched over, they're not responding, checking for a pulse, checking for breathing, tightness of chest outside of just anxiety, because sometimes those can be confused, right? And just really just paying attention. And I tell people, I'd rather you call 911 if you're not sure and be safe than say, oh, it's nothing, and then it be something, right? It's always better to be proactive and cautious than regretful.
Yeah, 911 is the phone call nobody wants to make, and nobody wants it made on them. But to your point, it's not just the clutching the chest, the bending over, right? It could be like a tingling arm. It can be back pain.
Mhm.
It can be nausea. It can be sweating. It can be feel like indigestion. And I think that is the trickiest part of the signs. It can
Yeah.
be any and everything. And all of those things could also be something else.
And
And
it's interesting. Sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's interesting because, again, as women, if we just feel something to be slightly off, we dismiss it.
Yeah.
But our signs look very different than a male's response to cardiac arrest. And that's why it's important to not dismiss anything. And I know for me, the moment I feel different, my doctor is on speed dial, because everything I've been through, my doctors have to be on speed dial just to update my case. But the moment something is off, I have to report it, because who knows what it could lead to. Now, we're not saying, you have a tickle in your throat, go to the ER, right? There's discretion here. But what we are saying is that we have intuition in our system to say something is off. Let me listen to it, or let me communicate to someone to say, I'm feeling this way, right? Because it's not just for us to make the move. How many times are you in the household on your spouse and you say, I'm just not feeling right, like we should go, right? It's important to communicate that forward, not just keep it in.
And I think taking the body of information, this is why knowing your numbers is so important, right? Because you're going to know, okay, I do have high blood pressure, or yes, I have diabetes. Both of those things are going to put me at a higher risk for something. You're also going to think about, what are the lifestyle habits I engage in? Yeah, maybe I don't exercise. And I know that puts me at a higher risk for a heart-related event. Maybe my diet isn't super heart healthy, and that puts me at risk. Maybe I have been a hot mess of stress, and that puts me at a higher risk. So you take all of this body of information that you should have about yourself, and then you pair it with a thing you might be feeling and experiencing to help you have discernment to determine, yeah, we probably need to do something.
But the
And
big thing about that is people being honest,
yes,
right?
yep.
That's the key to it, because you ask a lot of people, is your diet heart healthy? Well, yeah, I eat my vegetables. You had one vegetable meal this week.
Right.
That is not part of the diet, right? Like, so it comes back to, we have to be honest with ourselves, because the more we sugarcoat it, we're not helping anyone.
Well, and I think it also comes back to education, because people actually do think that they're eating healthy. I mean, I this is what I do for a living, and people say, yeah, I eat pretty healthy, and then I look at what they're eating, and I'm thinking, how are we defining healthy? Because this isn't, but it's because
Right.
that's what they were taught, or because that's what they've always eaten and they're fine, so it must be healthy. And I
Yep.
think that's where so much of maybe just the disconnect exists, is
Mhm.
we just don't have the information, except the information's out there. Again, it's been out there for decades. Now, it's changed a little bit. I will be the first to tell you, I do not subscribe to all of the dietary recommendations that the American Heart Association does. I don't love that there is a heart healthy sign on sugar cereals simply because it's made with whole grain. So this is again where a consumer needs to be educated, be a critical thinker. Like I think you said you learned in college how to ask questions. Don't
Mhm.
just say, "Oh, there's the heart sign on this bottle of vegetable oil. It must be good for my heart."
Mhm.
Because it's actually not. So there's a little bit there where we need to really drill down and button up all of that. But we can at least go to the basics, right? Like eat real food, lots of vegetables, fiber, make sure you're well hydrated. Like that is such a critical component that people
Oh,
don't
yes.
even take into account for their heart health. And
Well,
electrolyte balance and all of these other things that are kind of in the weeds and yet also like super key elements to how well our heart's going to be able to function.
I love that you said that, because it's so interesting. Again, this is why I always come back to, you have to be honest with yourself. You just said electrolytes. Now, drinking nonstop Gatorade does not mean that you're hydrating, and does not mean that you have electrolytes, right? But we've almost succumbed to marketing within the food industry that, to your point, there's a label here, so it's fine. Well, yes, okay, compared to everything else, it may be the best out of the options, but then recommending certain serving sizes. You're going way above that, right? So it's taking it and not really staying true to the recommendation, but then also we hear what we want to hear. Right. And that's the reality when it comes back to, you just said hydrate. I have a friend who tells me he hydrates all day. Well, what is he hydrating on? Coke.
Yeah.
That's not hydrating,
Right.
right? And if he does water, then he puts Propel in it all day. It's like, but it's not even no sugar added Propel. It is the full brown Propel. And if you even have, nothing against Propel, but if you even have, 12 of those, that's not the same as just having pure water, right? And your body's craving water. With being made up of mostly water, it's not Propel water, it's water in your system. And then for me, one of the things that really struck me as important for me to differentiate is when you talk about the different types of protein that exists. We are running the gamut with protein in everything. But when was the last time you questioned where the protein came from? What else is in the protein, right? And then you do that for every food group. You're starting to realize that, okay, maybe I mean, at least for me, maybe I need to grow my own garden. Maybe I need to, to limit certain things that I'm intaking, because despite it being healthy on paper, the options in front of me are not as healthy. How can I control some of this variable to say, at least I know what I'm putting in my mouth?
Well, and that's the thing. I want everyone to do the best they can in the real life that they live. For some people, it is not even in the realm of possibility to grow their own garden. It just isn't,
Mhm.
right? And
It's
so
not
then
for
someone will say,
some
"Well, I
people.
can't do that, so I got to go to McDonald's." Like, no, there's probably something in between. But to circle
Right.
back to we hear what we want to hear, let me just talk about red wine for a minute. I have to. I'm sorry, everybody. Red wine is not good for your heart. Okay? I don't care what they tell you. That is marketing. There are some properties of some types of grapes that have some components to it that might show some benefit for some aspect for some people for their heart.
In combination with other things, not
Thank
just
you.
on its own.
Right.
Yes.
So, it is, I mean, I get it. We want to like justify our vices, but just say you like red wine. Don't pretend that, oh, but it's good for my heart. It's not. Alcohol is not good for your heart. Can you enjoy an adult beverage and still have a heart healthy life? Absolutely. But I think how we phrase that really matters because the message is, oh, red wine's good for me. What should I do? I should drink it. Nah, not
And
really.
that's the way of hydrating
Right.
without doing anything else.
Exactly.
Because I'm hydrating.
Right. So let's shift all of this into leadership because I think the healthier, happier human you are, the better leader you're going to be. And
Yes.
yet, I know a lot of leaders are not healthy because they don't take care of themselves because they're busy taking care of everyone and everything, pushing the buttons, doing the grind, climbing the ladder, right? Being the leader. We don't have time for me because I'm leading all these people. So, talk about your move into the leadership space. Where did that come from? And a little bit of how you really do help people develop into leaders. And what are some things in your own particular toolkit that you use?
I love that. And it's all of the false narratives we tell ourselves when it comes to what leadership is. And to answer your question first, as to how I shifted into this, I was like everyone else in corporate, and I was growing growing up the corporate ladder, and no one tells you just how much leadership is a responsibility because you are leading others. And for some or most people, you have people's career and their livelihood in your hands, right? And that is a responsibility that I don't think a lot of people get prepared for. And as I was growing in the corporate ladder and my direct report teams grew and the different positions I was in changed, I recognized the level of stress that came with this because there wasn't alignment in the organization I was in that aligned with either my values or how I viewed leadership. So there was really a disconnect because the ones I was a part of, they viewed leadership as micromanagement, making sure that you are checking things off the checklist versus ensuring that the employee is okay. It was more about the bottom dollar than the employee themselves. And the real transition came for me as part of that COVID experience when I was at that time, I was a leader. I had a position in which I had multiple teams reporting to me. And in the midst of me trying to heal from COVID, I was worried about my job. And I was worried because I had an HR department trying to tell me, despite me having a doctor's note that I can't travel, me having restrictions and limitations, they were trying to get creative of how I can go around my doctor's note and wanting me to travel, wanting me to push myself more. And it just hit me that you don't care about me as a person, you care about the bottom dollar, right? And I had said in that moment, this is going to kill me. And if I die, it's just my life that's gone. They're going to be quite fine. Right? And that was the crossroads for me. Do I continue along this and eventually potentially kill myself because of this? Or do I make a change and recognize how many organizations are like this, including the human resources department, and try and help from the outside in to reshift the focus on employees versus just on profitability? Because if you focus on the employee, profitability would come. And that really mirrored with my background. I have my bachelor's in business economics, so I understand business and the markets, but then I also have my master's in industrial organizational psychology. So I understand people in business and the humanistic side alongside business structure and market structure. And I said, you know what, let's marry these two and really bring forth my experience, my knowledge, and my perspectives and see how I can help organizations really shift back to a servant leadership mindset that starts from the individual and understanding from the individual perspective who they are, what their skills are, what their strengths are, what their values are, and how do they bring forth to an organization. And that, it has been such a wild journey ever since because I love that I'm able to see changes in people, improvements, even personal satisfaction, and the change in what that has done for their departments or even their organizations. And it's all because you change your mindset into looking at things differently, right? And that has been my love of leadership, despite its responsibility and its stressors, right? But getting to the root of it, that as a leader, I'm here to serve others, but I had to serve myself first, despite what people think. You do have to serve yourself first before you can serve others in the best light.
And I have a feeling you outline all of this in your book, Discovering Your Inner CEO. So let's talk a little about that and about your leadership makeup bag, because I think, especially for women, we can relate to the makeup bag. So I want to talk about those two things.
Okay, so the book, Discovering Your Inner CEO, has been a journey that I never thought I would be on. I did not wake up, in my teens and say, one day I'm going to be an author. That was not on the plan. But life happens. And taking all of what I experienced and recognizing, like you said, a lot of time women in leadership positions, they don't tap into their true potential because there's not an understanding of who they are and what they bring to the table, right? And the book, as it's designed as an empowerment journal for women, is really to get to the root of who am I? What are my passions? What are my values? What am I willing to work towards? How am I holding myself accountable? All different areas of life that I'm focusing on or not focusing on. Let me really have a thorough understanding of who I am before I can bring myself to other people or serve other people. And that has been a great journey. It was launched, we're approaching the 1 year anniversary, and the feedback I've received has been great because I'm asking questions that I never thought that I needed to answer, but people don't think about for themselves. And I tell people now, you remember when you're in a new relationship and things are great and you can't wait for this person to call, or you go on dates and you're asking questions, you're getting to know them. When was the last time you got that excited to get to know yourself? And usually when I ask that, they're like, what are you talking about? And how can you get to know someone else and allow them to know you if you don't know you? And that has been one of the things that really gave me the idea to do this. And I'm just excited for the outcomes so far because who knows where this will go. And then the leadership makeup bag, this was a fun idea that I had because, as you mentioned, with women, we can relate to makeup bags. And the fundamentals that exist in the makeup bag, from your mascara, your lipstick, your eyeliner, when you really look at what those tools are meant to do, for example, your eyeliner defines your eyes, right? Well, have you defined your path with precision and clarity? Have you, gone specifically to the area? Are we doing cat eye? Are we doing, I don't know all the details of makeup, but when you think about it and say, oh, my lipstick, am I being bold with red today? Am I being like a little more subtle? How do we really have that as part of us? Am I being bold in my personality? Am I trying to fit in? What am I doing? Like, that's embodying who we are inside, not just the physical aspect of what we're trying to portray.
When I think of the makeup bag, the first thing that I think of is foundation. Because the first thing most of us, we do the toner, we do the stuff, but we put on foundation, right? So, like, my mascara isn't going to make me look great if I don't have decent foundation on. So, what are some of these foundational things that I think for leadership, and maybe women in leadership specifically, what are maybe some of those keys that you would say, if there's anybody out there just aspiring to develop their inner CEO and really be the best version of them, be that leader? What are some of the foundational traits that are pretty consistent across the board when you think about, a really highly effective leader?
Well, that's so much to unpack. The first thing is, I neglected to mention, CEO in the book title is actually your chief emboldened officer. And emboldened, for a lot of people, it's not a word they hear very often, but it really just means to have the courage to act. And that's why I put it as your chief emboldened officer, to say that I am in charge of the power I have to act. Right. So I wanted to clarify that. I love that you say foundation. I'm actually not a foundation girl. I love the fact that my skin just works for itself because of all the water that I drink. Again, another benefit of hydration, right? But to the point of foundation, the goal is to create that smooth base, right? To really have that ability to say, I have a canvas. Before I build the canvas, let me create the canvas. And to your point as to leadership foundations, it comes back to your values, right? What are your values? And I tell people it's okay to say, one of my values is honesty. Well, how do you play your values in action? Are you always honest? Right? One of my values is personally accountability. And I lose sleep if I tell you I'm going to do something and I haven't done it. I'll have people who say to me, "Oh, I forgot about that. I can't believe you remembered that." I've lost sleep because it's still on my checklist and I told you I was going to do it. It's very important to me that I live out my values. And that is integral to being a really good leader, because if you don't know what your values are, then you'll believe in anything, you'll follow the crowd, you won't stand for anything. And how can you be a leader of others if you're not leading yourself first? Right? And that comes back to also your principles and how that builds into your personal confidence, how you've learned to communicate with others, how you really collaborate across the board because you know what you bring to the table. It all starts with you internally.
Yeah, and it sounds like it all starts with authenticity and confidence and all of those things. And I think it's important for people to understand that you develop into a leader, right? Most of us have these traits and characteristics within. It's if you choose to develop them and choose to learn and grow and become, really step into that kind of space. Gosh, Tracy, this is so good. Anything before we officially wrap up that you want the listeners to know that we haven't covered?
Well, I will say just, people think leadership is a goal that you will eventually accomplish one day. Leadership is constantly evolving because situations evolve. But that's why it's so important that you have your own personal North Star, your principles and your goals that are guiding you, because that way, no matter what situation arises, you know that you can lean into that to really help you solve the problem or have the answer. So it's not that you say, "I'm going to be a leader tomorrow." Okay, well, when tomorrow comes, you may have accomplished the title. You may now have the leadership, the direct report team. But as a leader, you're constantly growing because we don't know how we're going to react to new situations until we're in it. We don't know parts of ourselves until we're exposed to it. We as evolutionary beings, we're constantly growing and we need to constantly get to know each other, because know about each other, know about ourselves. Because at the end of the day, I can tell you, if you've ever reread some of the stuff you said in an email 6 months ago, you'll reread it and say, "Who is that? Who's talking right there?" Like, I don't know. But at the time it sounded fabulous, right? And then because you've evolved and you've grown, you look back and say, "Wow, I've come a long way." That's growth. That's continuous growth. And that's one thing I want people to remember, that there's no end point to learning about yourself as a leader. It's constant.
That is a great message to wrap up on. Thank you so much. We're going to put all of the information on how to get in touch with the American Heart Association. You want to bring CPR training into your organization, that can happen. You want someone to come in and speak to you about heart healthy anything, that can happen. And we'll put all the links to get connected to Tracy in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing. And listeners, now you get to go and be a better being.
Thank you for listening to the Be a Better Being podcast. We hope that what you heard today inspires you to embrace this journey of life with an open mind, a kind heart, and a willingness to learn and evolve. If you have a show topic idea or would like to be a guest, please visit betterbeings.net and fill out a contact form. Until next time, go and be a better being.